Welcome to this course on Thomas Aquinas on the nature and attainment of happiness. I'm Richard Taylor from Marquette University and also visiting professor at the Catholic University of Leuven. And together with my colleague at Leuven, Professor Andrea Robilio, we present this course on Thomas Aquinas. This is class number 6 on Aristotle and Kindi on happiness. This is video 6b. Video 6a was on Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics for the most part. This is video 6b on Kindi on his treatise on dispelling sorrows. As indicated on the syllabus, I was going to do some work on the later Hellenistic philosophers, but of course that's not necessary because we have that in the treatise of Kindi, as we'll see shortly. So let's proceed. Kindi's treatise on dispelling sorrows is absolutely replete with moral philosophy from the traditions of the Epicureans and Stoics. And this is made clear by Adamson and Porman, their note in their introduction to the translation of the philosophical works of Kindi, which I draw upon for this lecture. But let's look back on Epicurus and the Stoics, however briefly. For Epicurus, the soul is corporeal, and as a result, neither survives death, nor is it unaffected by impressions from physical things. I state it that way because, in fact, Kindi and, interestingly enough, St. Augustine do have a conception of the soul being able to resist things outside and also have a conception of the soul that is incorporeal. But we'll look into that shortly. So for Epicurus, the soul is corporeal, and as a result neither survives death, nor is it unaffected by impressions of physical things. Hence it can't escape worries, fears, desires that arise naturally. But it can take care to avoid unnecessary desires and expectations involved in overreaching, often resulting in worry and despair. That is, if we seek out too much, and we take too much, we concentrate too much on getting things for ourselves or great honors for ourselves in a kind of overreaching, then we will often be disappointed because we won't always succeed in these matters. So Epicurus advocates for a life of tranquility, one avoiding anxiety through the suppression of excessive desires. And for that's all I have to say on Epicurus as a short introduction, but I refer you to the nice articles in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and also in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. These are valuable, short accounts. So let's proceed. As for the Stoics, they focused on their ethical doctrine as a practical way of life for the dominating part of the human being, the soul, which is in the perishable material pneuma, though, as Balzi notes in his another very good article in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Chrysippus, quote, alleged that the souls of the wise would not perish until the next conflagration. So there is some sense among some of the Stoics of, in some way, the soul living on, but that comes to be, for the most part, abandoned in later Stoicism. The Stoics in general understood the happy life to be one that's pleasant, not one of excessive and extreme pleasures, but one that is pleasant, a pleasant life of moral virtues and the avoidance of pathe, that is, the affective passions of the soul. So the soul wants to remain unaffected as much as possible, that is, undisturbed, in perhaps a pleasant tranquility of some kind, but certainly not the extremes, which were much to be avoided. So these pathe are affective passions of the soul, such as appetite and fear, pleasure and distress, and these draw one away from moral virtue. And to the extent they draw one away from moral virtue, they draw one away into unhappiness, or into some sort of life that is not pleasant, but full of difficulty. This, then, is the Stoic notion of apathy, that is, a lack of pathos. They assert that we should seek out a lack of passion because of the disappointment that can be involved. One which then, a life which seeks to minimize extremes for the sake, again, of the tranquility of the soul, much as we see in Epicurus. Kindi draws on both these sources at considerable length. And so I recommend also here to you another article from the Stanford Encyclopedia, right? The Balsley article. But let's proceed with Kindi. So, both Epicurean and Stoic principles of ethical action are found in Kindi's treatise, as he provides practical advice and convincing stories about the perils of involvement with the world through a lack of moderation and the moral virtues. So he certainly draws on the Stoics and Epicureans for that. Yet for Kindi, these are ultimately shown to serve the soul in guiding it to right formation in preparation for the afterlife. And that's something quite different. As we'll see, there's quite a bit of Platonism and Neoplatonism in the thought of Kindi. Some of it is under the name of Aristotle, as we'll see shortly, but nevertheless, for the most part, Kindi's thought is ultimately a form of Platonism. In his metaphysics and philosophical psychology, then, Kindi is Platonist in his conception of the soul, something not altogether surprising in light of his extensive use of Enneads 4 through 6 of Plotinus, and of the metaphysics of unity found in the elements of theology of the great Neoplatonist Proclus. Kindi apparently assembled around him a circle or a school of philosophers and translators who rendered the materials from Greek into Arabic and then extracted things from them and created their own treatises. One of the largest sets of translations is the Plotiniana Arabica, the Arabic Plotinus materials from Enneads 4 through 6. And I recommend the study of this work by Peter Adamson. It's really quite good on this. But the Plotiniana Arabica then are parts of the Enneads 4 through 6 that were translated into Arabic. The translations were also transformations, because this was not a static text, but rather a living text that told its readers about the nature of the reality they see around them. It isn't regarded just as a historical text, but a living text that gives a worldview of exactly what they see before them. So the Arabic Plotinus material is a limited amount of material from Enneads 4 through 6, but it's also transformed. And as Peter Adamson has shown, it's transformed with a certain kind of Neoplatonized Aristotelianism. So there's a bit of Aristotle in this, but it's also quite a bit of Neoplatonism found in it. Also, the one of Plotinus is transformed into the first cause and the creator in the Arabic Plotinus. Now we know that from the vocabulary in the work, particularly the work of Fritz Zimmermann and also Gerhard Endres, we know of this circle of Kindi and this collection of texts that were available in the early 9th century in Baghdad. And one of the treatises involved on this topic is the Theology of Aristotle, which the manuscripts have explicitly Kindi saying that he edited the text. And it's called the Theology of Aristotle because it was regarded as the theological developments on the soul and the one that should have been found in Aristotle. So in a sense, it's the Theology of Aristotle as the theology as Aristotle would have set it forth in the continuation of his work on metaphysics and the nature of the soul. But it's also fundamentally Plotinian and Platonist. Another work that arises in the circle of Kindi is the Kalam fi Mahtacher, or Discourse on the Pure Good, a text which was translated into Latin in Toledo and came to be known as the Book of Causes. This is an account of the first cause of all things and the emanation from it, and also an account of primary causality, where the first cause is the only creator and is the primary cause of all things. This work is derived from the from the Elements of Theology of Proclus, the Neoplatonist. But again, it's transformed in accordance with the understandings of the Circle of Kindi, transformed into a book which would be acceptable as an account of, which may well be acceptable as an account of creation for the thinkers of the three major Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The translators involved with Kindi were largely Christian, and the translator of the Theology of Aristotle and likely all of the Platiniana Arabica was probably Abdulmasih ibn Na'ima, and Abdulmasih is the servant of the Savior. So he's an Eastern Christian. So let's proceed. We'll see more of this influence in Al-Kindi later on, but we'll also see some influence from this early period of the circle of Al-Kindi in later thinkers as well. Al-Kindi's Platonism, or Neoplatonism, keep in mind the term Neoplatonism is a 19th century term, not one that the philosophers use of themselves. His Platonism or Neoplatonism is clear in his references to the world of intellect that arise in the context of his providing Stoic reasoning, quite similar to what we find in Latin in St. Augustine, for whom the soul moves and acts in accord with the weight of its love. If the soul directs its love downward, then that carries it away from the things that it should love, carries it to those things which are transitory and that we are not fully in control of. If I invest all of my love, care, concern, etc., in my wealth, I can lose that at any time. Whereas if I invest my love, care, and concern in the higher virtues, these are things which I cannot lose except by my own will. Whereas my car, my money, many other things, I can lose without willing. So St. Augustine put forward this notion that we are carried by the weight of our love, either upward or downward. Something quite similar is reflected here in the treatise by Al-Kindi, as we'll see. So, as you may know, then, this for Augustine, he had moved away from academic skepticism to a form of Platonism, thanks to his experience of sermons of St. Ambrose at Milan, and also thanks to Latin translations of Plotinus by Marius Victorinus or other sources. Augustine seems not to have known Greek very well at all, and so he relied on these translations. But he was very much influenced by these, and his Platonism is developed out of a kind of Middle Platonism and Plotinian texts. But let's proceed here with Al-Kindi. So Al-Kindi's ethics. Al-Kindi writes, quote, "Necessarily, stability and constancy only exist in the world of intellect, which we can contemplate." So as I indicated, Al-Kindi is drawing upon Plotinus here. This is the Plotinian world of intellect. And it's something that we can know, that is, contemplate, we can have intellectual understanding of. Carry on. Therefore, if we do not want to lose the things we love, and do not want to be frustrated in obtaining things we seek, we must contemplate the intellectual world, and form our conceptions of what we love, possess, and want from it, that is, from the intellectual world. So this is very much like Augustine in the sense that we must invest ourselves not in things that we can lose, but we must love those things that will not frustrate us and will be in the higher realm. So that will be the virtues and the excellences and things of intellect. Kindi goes on, if we do this, we are sure that no one can rob us of our possessions, and no power can seize them from us. Again, this is exactly as we see in St. Augustine. These cannot be lost except by our own will. And he goes on, and that we will not lack the things we love, since disease does not touch them, death does not attain them, and no striving after them is to be frustrated. For the intelligible things which one seeks are interconnected in a constant way without moving or fading. They can be grasped and do not frustrate. So clearly, he has his eye on the Plotinian conception of the upper world of intellect and of the rational soul. This is also evident when he writes the following: "For it is through our souls that we are what we are, not through our bodies. Because what all bodies have in common is corporeality, whereas every living thing has life in common, and this is through the soul. Our soul is essential to us, and the welfare of our essence is more incumbent upon us than the welfare of things alien to us. Our body is an instrument for our soul, through which the soul's activities are made apparent, Improving our essences is much more befitting for us than improving our instruments. Close quote. So the body in this case is a tool or an instrument to be used for the perfection of the soul. And in some sense then, the real self put forward here is, in the Platonic conception, the soul. And as we'll see later on, Avicenna similarly has the body as described as an instrument for the rational soul. His teachings are a bit more complex, but we'll see those later on as they're relevant to our discussion of happiness and the attainment of happiness in this class. The assertion of the lack of value of possessions, of course, is taken from the Stoics. And here, Kindi uses it to support his Platonism. And he writes the following, quote, "The things which truly belong to us and which are not shared by anybody else are those which no hand can reach and nobody can take away from us. That is, the psychic goods which our souls possess." Close quote. So that's perfectly in accord with what I said about in the previous slides here. Further, he says, quote, "We also ought to pay attention to the fact that all our possessions which are shared are loaned to us, but belong to a lender who is the creator of possessions. Great be his praise." Now that added phrase, "great be his praise," and the description as a creator of possessions, is of course God as creator. And God lends things to us. We don't own them as such, according to the account in this part of the treatise. He goes on, "He can bestow his loan whenever he wants, and transfer it to whomever he wants. If he did not transfer them to whomever he wanted, they would never have come to us in the first place. We may think that if he should take them away from us and place them in the hands of our enemies, he acts against us in an evil way." But of course he goes on to indicate that that's not at all the case. In fact, we didn't own these from the beginning, and we should have expected to lose them at some point. Let's carry on. His simile of the sea voyage and the visit to the island, which he describes as representing, quote, "our passage from this world to the real world." So notice the phraseology here, the Platonist phraseology here, from this world to the real world. And of course, the real world is a world of contemplation and intellect, the world of the rational soul. So, his simile of the sea voyage and visit to the island, which he describes as representing our passage from this world to the real world, illustrating, quote, "the states of those who go astray in this world," close quote, is a particularly vivid account of the hierarchy of characters and multiple sorts of failings human beings can have. Those who do not keep their focus on on proper ethical practices do not find a suitable place on the ship, due to their obsession with the island and its transitory attractions. That is, those people who pay too much attention to the Platonic realm of opinion and change, to the physical world around us, will find themselves obsessed with those things and not able to pull away from them, perhaps being left on the island in that sense, and they won't be able to return to their true homeland, their true self, their true place, which is the place of intellect in the other world. He also writes then, and I thought this was rather vivid, so I wanted to put it in here, he writes, quote, "Some are torn by beasts of prey." These are people who were left behind on the island because they didn't go back to the boat. They went exploring, as it were, into the world of sensuality, and they were managed to be stuck there somehow or other, and not able to return to their proper place on the ship, that is, proper place in the realm of intellect, and in the realm in which we use our rationality to conduct our actions. So he writes, quote, "Some are torn by beasts of prey, some drop into deep ravines, some get caught in quagmires, others are bitten by snakes and become horrible and abominable corpses whose limbs are torn apart and repulsive. They inspire pity in people who do not know them, and are a warning to those who did, and are now cut off from their homeland, which was their destination." I like that because it's particularly vivid and frightening, But that's his purpose, to say that in fact it's a frightening thing to be caught out there in the physical world, when in fact that is not our true home. That is not the ship on which we belong. Concluding the simile, then, Kindi writes the following, quote, "Yet those who return to the ship without being distracted by anything which their senses perceived," so we're not going to be controlled by our sensuality, pardon me, "having only looked around as long as they were disembarked to satisfy their needs," so we don't go to live in that world, but rather we only look around to satisfy our needs, "came back before the others to the most spacious and comfortable place, and reached their homeland in a rested state." So they're not continually and anxiously distracted by these things. They're not involved in the passions and other things. See, the Stoic and the Epicurean element in this, they're not involved in those things, they're not attracted into them, but rather they return as they ought to be, as rational souls and rational human beings. The homeland, then, of course, is the realm of intellect, and the rational soul, or nous in Plotinus, ultimately to be identified with the Islamic religious understanding of heaven. So Kindi is accommodating this to Islamic religious understandings, or better than accommodating, he's seeing the truth in both. So this homeland, that is the abode of intellect. And he then writes, "Yet when it comes to the abode of the intellect, where there is no sensible pain and no sensible possessions which are connected to all sensible and psychic pains and possessions, and where it can enjoy intellectual goods, the possession of which is not reached by any hand or illness, whose owner is never driven away from his property." This is the same image again, that you do not, this is to develop the intellectual aspect and the virtuous aspect of the soul, is to be where one belongs, is to be in one's homeland, and is to have something that can be never taken away from oneself. Whereas other things, lower things, can be taken away from us without our will. Hence, we should not involve ourselves in that lower external world. He again parallels the reflections of Augustine, who was also influenced by the Stoics, I think, as I said earlier, when he writes the following, quote, "Therefore we say, he who does not acquire things external to himself is master of the things which turn kings into slaves. That is, anger and desire, which are the source of vices and pain." So, if you do not acquire things external to oneself, then you will not be caught up in this need for things. And this, of course, is something he indicates with regard to the Crystal Palace in his simile and discussion of the king. This transformation of Stoic, Epicurean, and Plotinian notions to serve the ends of philosophy in the new cultural context of Islam is reflected also in Kindi's final remarks. Quote, "Praiseworthy brother," so this treatise was written in response to a request. He writes now, "Praiseworthy brother, firmly imitate these recommendations in your soul, so that you may be safe through them from the afflictions of sorrow." This was a treatise on the dispelling of sorrow. The afflictions of sorrow, and reach the best homeland, which is the house of rest and the abode of the righteous. And of course, these are both religious and philosophical terms. "May God grant you complete happiness in your two houses, the house of this world and the house of the next. Give you the most splendid well-being in them. Make you one of those who emulate and enjoy by harvesting the fruits of the intellect. And may he keep you from the baseness of ignorance." Close quote. So as you can see, this, although he's using Stoic and Epicurean notions, they've been transformed and put into a Plotinian or Platonist context. And then also, they're also modestly moved to a bit of transformation so that they may be suitable for the Islamic context as well. But again, it's not that he's treating something, he's not creating a treatise that would be acceptable in the Islamic context and so somehow sneaking philosophy in, but rather for him, these are roads to reality. He does say in his work on first philosophy that he does argue there that the foreign science of philosophy, which in Arabic is called falsafa, not a proper Arabic word, but one made from a transliteration, he does say that falsafa provides one of the routes to the understanding of absolute divine unity. The other route, of course, is in Islamic religion and is in theological study of Tawheed, the notion of divine oneness. I think that's it for this video, and we'll see you in class.